Hello, welcome to our time together where we talk about a Jesus story. We're glad that you are participating with us, even if it's online. We hope that you let us know that you're here by liking or commenting. If this is an especially meaningful message to you, I hope that you share it with others. And the friends that are here, we've just enjoyed amazing waffles and various flavored syrups and fruit and all kinds of stuff. And so we hope that at some point you might be able to join us here and share a meal with us. And I would like to invite you to welcome those who are worshiping with us online. I'm ready to say welcome. Welcome. Yay, we're glad that you're here. We've just been talking about tasks that seem insurmountable to us, that seem impossible, like we don't think we could ever accomplish. And when I asked the question, the very first thing that I heard was a very resolute, definite answer. I said, have you ever had a task that just seemed impossible to you? And I heard, cleaning my kitchen. In no uncertain terms. And that, yeah, you know what? It's just funny because I can relate to that feeling, looking at a huge mess that seems, impossible. But I wonder, before we kind of get into what we're talking about today, if I could have a volunteer, and I won't tell you what it's for yet. So it has to be an adventurous volunteer. Caitlin, yes! All right. Caitlin, do you see that big gray pole over there? Yep. May I ask you to go stand by that? Sure. All right, Caitlin. Let's just pretend that, you're in a pit, and see that bottom blue tape right there? That's how tall the pit is. Would you be able to, put your hands up there and crawl out of that pit? Yeah? All right. See, there she goes. What about the next one up? Let's say it's that tall. Would you be able to do that? Put your hands up there and crawl out of that pit, do you think? I mean, it'd be hard. It would take a lot. It would take a lot. Maybe some, effort or time. Oh, look at her ingenuity. Yeah? She's thinking. She's using her noggin. And then what about the next one up? If you were, stuck and it was, life or death, right? I could maybe. Probably. I feel a little bit more despair. Yeah. All right, so now I want to draw your attention to that piece of tape at the top. Now, if you're online with us, it's about, I don't know, what'd you guys say, 15 feet tall maybe? All right, try to jump up there and get up to that. Oh, you can jump though. That was pretty impressive. Yes, Caitlin. So is there any way we can get out of this? I mean, if we thought really hard, or if we just worked out every day or something and could jump maybe higher. Phone a friend. Maybe I don't know, your spouse or something. I actually was oh no, I can't. Thank you, Caitlin, for volunteering for that. I can't say it's somebody who can jump high. Oh yes, give Caitlin a hand. Because then he might volunteer, and what if he can jump and touch that top thing? Then that destroys the object lesson. But thank you so much for being a good sport, Caitlin. I appreciate that. I wonder in your life, if you think about your life, has there ever been anything that God has done for you that literally only God could do? There's this Hebrew concept. They're very descriptive in their words, and there's several verses that say the arm of the Lord is never too short to save. And so if you imagine being in a pit, if you're in a pit that's 15 feet deep or 8 million miles deep, the arm of God is never too short to save. God's got really long arms. And because God is the God of the impossible, God specializes in the impossible. So we're going to look at a story today. I'm not going to read it to you. I'm going to tell it to you. There are two different Very, very, very similar versions. One is in Luke chapter 8, the other one is in Mark chapter 5. So I'm going to kind of tell the details from both of these stories as I tell this story. So Jesus is in ministry, and he is crossing a lake to the other side of the lake. He goes to a region where there are less Jews, and it is more Gentile, which means these people aren't Jews, don't have the Torah, haven't been studying the Hebrew Bible, aren't probably worshiping Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews. And he gets out of a boat, and we meet a character. The character that we meet in this story is this man who it says he lives among the tombs. And when he shows up, he's naked. He doesn't have any clothes on. And then as he's coming toward them, they realize he's very loud. He's crying at the top of his lungs. It says that this man's daily life was that he would cry out all day and all night, and then he would take stones and cut himself with stones because he's in such distress and so much pain. And when they look at his hands and when they look at his feet, they see blisters and sores all over in circles around his hands and his feet, because it says that's where the people of the town used to chain him up because they had no idea what else to do with this man. But he was so strong, he would break out of those chains, and so he's isolated from people. He's living alone. He might be on his last, thread. We don't know. But this is the state that this man is in. It is such a sad state to be in, to the extreme, right? And the diagnosis in the ancient world for this condition was that this person had an impure spirit. I mean, that was how their whole entire culture would have viewed this man. Now, a psychiatrist diagnosing it today would probably say that there was a lot, it's a complex issue. What do they call it? A co-presenting dual diagnosis. There was probably so much that needed to be healed on this man. He probably had some mental illness going on. He may have had some trauma in his past. We know that the community had traumatized him, so there was trauma upon trauma probably for people trying to figure out how to deal with him. We don't know what his physical situation was. We don't know any of that. But if Jesus, I want you to remember that every story we get in our Bibles is a story in a particular historical context. Yes, it's the Word of God, and it transcends time, and there are truths in there that nourish people in every place and time, but it just so happens that it was told in a particular historical context. So just because we think differently about things than they did in first century Palestine, doesn't mean that this story isn't true. You know what I mean? So if Jesus, for example, were to say, okay, you know what, let me just tell you guys something about, neurotransmitters and chemicals in the brain and dopamine and serotonin, and there's a prefrontal cortex, and it's not the heart where you think where your seat of the decision making is from. That's what they believe. It's really this wrinkly organ in your head, and it controls nerves, and then they're invisible little things that zip through your body. They would have been okay, you're the crazy one, go live outside of our town, because you can't speak to someone in a completely unheard of language and culture that they don't know. So this story is told to us from this perspective. We have to remember that. But I don't want us to get bogged down on the diagnoses. I think that sometimes as, modern people or Westerners, we love to really get obsessed with the cause and the diagnoses because we want to cure, we want to fix. But the point of this whole thing is that this poor man was in extreme distress. Are you with me? No matter what you think caused it, no matter what conclusion you come to. Because again, at AHMA Church, I don't tell people what to believe. I know everybody has, and we respect one another's opinions about stuff, and we respect one another's perspectives on stuff. But the point is, this man was in so much danger, harm to himself, harm maybe even to others, unable to provide his basic needs of food and clothing and shelter. This man was in a pit so deep he was powerless to help himself. He could not do anything, I don't think, to change his situation. And for all of the effort that maybe a caring person in the town, maybe uncaring people, for all of the effort that he or whoever, because he's somebody's kid and he's somebody's friend, right? And he's somebody's something. This is the situation that it has devolved to. That he's living alone and naked and cutting himself and crying out and just really, really kind of on his last leg here. And the story goes like this. He falls on his knees and he says in front of Jesus, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Don't torture me." Now, as a person living in a pagan territory, Most High God was one of the names, the descriptions that they used for the Jewish God, right? Like the Most High God. They didn't call him the same names, the Yahweh or even the El Shaddai that the Jews would have called Yahweh. They had this idea of, okay, they have this conception of the Most High God. So this makes sense from a pagan point of view that this, and he probably maybe has heard of Jesus. Maybe the healing and the miracles had gone to this region. Maybe he's heard of him. But he's out there and he says this to Jesus. And then it says Jesus commanded the unclean spirit to come out. Throughout this story, Jesus is depicted as confident, as unafraid, just speaking like one would speak to somebody. But guess what? This unclean spirit didn't come out right away. This is the only time that I can think of where Jesus commands, the unclean spirit to come out and it doesn't right away. So Jesus is having a conversation with this man. I mean, this must have been a really, really tough case. So Jesus says, "What's your name?" That's a really relatable question. That's a human question. I mean, out of all the things I might want to say to this man, or not say and run, Jesus engages him in conversation, and very human conversation. The man answers, he says, "My name is Legion," because there's many of us. And this is also a cultural reference. A legion of Roman soldiers was a lot of people. The history tells us that about 5,000 or 6,000 soldiers were in one legion. This man has a lot of things going on. Sometimes the path to healing is also unpleasant. Has anybody experienced that? The cure sometimes involves some difficulty. I mean, one of the classic examples I can think of is withdrawal from drugs isn't pleasant. I don't know if anybody's ever had to experience that before. But sometimes it may feel much more tempting to continue to try and escape through denial or substances or resistance to facts or clinging to our hurt. Our wounds might feel familiar. We might think at first that the God who's coming to heal us, we might think that that's going to be too painful. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Like, I want to stay at the bottom of the pit because the light is too bright up there. I want to stay where I am. And when we find ourselves confused and distraught and torn apart by many conflicting reactions to multiple situations, lacking that knowledge of God that would unify our experience and give peace and wholeness to our souls, because again, this is a soul that Jesus encountered. We're in the Lover of Our Souls series. Sometimes God confronts us, and we may first perceive God as the enemy demanding something from us that we might find painful to give. Maybe a radical readjustment of our thoughts or our actions, or a reorientation of like a new discipline we've got to include. Or, sometimes if you think about it, God is the tormentor of our torment. And if we have really adhered to our torment, that can feel a little bit painful sometimes. And then we experience that God becomes the companion that's sustaining us and strengthening us, the source of life, of salvation, and of peace. But this depiction of someone having 5,000, various things tearing them apart, that, when I feel the most distressed, I feel torn in lots of different directions. Anybody else? When I feel anxious, when I feel like I am powerless and overwhelmed in a pit, to me, that kind of feels a little bit like a metaphor to how I don't feel whole. I don't feel unified. That peace that would unify every single thing and quiet everything inside me. So chaotic inside this man is that the I is like a whole mob of folks pulling in different directions. So the story goes on that, the man says, which the spirit inside the man, according to this story, says that he begged Jesus to send him then into the pigs. And Jesus gave permission, and then, the pigs ran off of a cliff and into a lake and drowned. And then it says that people who were tending the pigs, which if you were tending the pigs, how would you feel right about now?
Distressed.
Stress. It's like, I was telling someone earlier today, when I was the very first teacher, they said, just don't lose any of them. And the very first day, you're going to be okay. Keep all 25 kids and send them home, and you'll be fine. Your profession and what you are responsible for, it would be stressful too. So anyway, this whole herd ran off the cliff, and that means their whole livelihood just ran off that cliff. So they're not happy. And they went to tell the townspeople, and the townspeople came out, and this is the line that is the most, I just read this line over and over, and I think this line, I reflect on this line because I think it's the most beautiful picture. It says, when the townspeople came back to see what these pig tenders were talking about, they saw the man sitting next to Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. That's the description. He's clothed and in his right mind. I don't know if there has ever been a bigger contrast of before and after. Someone encounters Jesus as this man right here. And he's sitting there calmly and peacefully. I imagine a smile on his face. Because how good would it feel to have your wholeness back, your soul totally restored after that kind of experience? Clothed and in his right mind. And this is a graphic story, and it's a vivid story. And if anybody's fascinated by the pigs, you're not the only one. That's a part of the story that is like, whoa, that's a striking detail. What's going on with those pigs? I want to figure that out. And I don't want us to meander off into the pigs herd in our minds very long, because it turns out, as I was reading about some of the context, that there are some common folktale tropes from that culture in this story. Demons and madmen are said to live among the tombs. It was a popular superstition at that time that demons entered into herds of animals. And they believed demons could enter people and animals. But the point is, the story does not center around those pigs. The story centers around this man, the soul of a man that Jesus loved. And so this guy that we're looking at, he wasn't just having a bad day. He wasn't just like in need of a listening ear or like a really great therapy session. He wasn't like in need of about like some advice about where he could find a job. Okay? He was so broken, he was so pushed down, he was so traumatized, he was so powerless, he was in such a deep pit, he literally needed God to intervene. The difference between, I can do this, I just need the right friends or resources or strength or advice, between like, there is nothing that me or anyone else can do, there's only God that can come through for this right now. That was the situation that he was in. Sometimes we say in recovery, like, well, I can't do that for them. They're going to have to do it for themselves. And that is true. We can't do for people what they can do for themselves. But there are times when people are so low, even doing for themselves isn't going to work. They're past that point. They're so far down, they really need the divine. They really, really need God. And you might say, this doesn't relate to me, this story. I've never been like this man. You might say, like, this man was really bad off. I've never been like this man. Publicly. Maybe. Right? But have you ever been so distressed or in an overwhelmed situation that you felt powerless or out of control? Have you ever been like that? I mean, we're not just talking about, being unhoused and naked and crying somewhere. We are also talking about being in any kind of situation where we come to the end of ourselves, where we realize, okay, I've been trying and I'm just going to try harder, and then that doesn't work, and then like, no, I'm going to try harder, and then that doesn't work, and they're like, no, okay, I'm going to call this person and they're going to help me, but then that doesn't work, and you go through every single resource that you know of, every single ounce of money maybe that you can spend on this thing, or maybe every single prayer that you can pray, you're just out-prayed, and you're at the end of all of yourself and all of your efforts, and you realize, that pit is that tall, and there's nothing that I'm going to be able to do. No amount of smarts or ingenuity or anything that I can pull myself out of this pit. I need God. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Paul says in Romans 7, he's describing a situation, a spiritual situation like this, and he says, the good that I want to do, I can't do. But the evil that I don't want to do, that's what I find myself doing. And I find myself constantly not even able to choose the right for myself. And so he's reasoning to himself, so that must mean that it's not me that's doing it, but that there's sin or something living inside of me that's kind of taking mastery over me, and I can't break free from it. I cannot save myself. There's nothing that I can do. And so then he ends up crying out to God, who is able to save me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ. And what is it in your life that you might feel powerless over? Because if we could fix everything ourselves with our effort or money or connections or resources, we wouldn't need God. This is where God specializes. This is where God gets to shine as God. Crying out to God from a place of powerlessness recognizes who God is and who we are as well. We aren't Superman. We're fragile, we're mortal, we're temporary. The very next story is about Jesus literally raising the dead. Because there's a situation we might all find ourselves in someday where we can't raise ourselves from the dead. We are out of effort and energy and strength. And we rely on a God who can raise from the dead. But God does what no one else can do. This man is clothed and sitting at the feet of Jesus in his right mind. This is my favorite picture. God can do that and is doing that for each and every one of us. So I'm going to actually say a prayer, and I'm going to play a song. It's one of my favorite songs. It's called He Has Time. But the main line of the song is, Jesus runs after the broken ones. Everyone in that town was not running toward that man. They were running away. But Jesus runs after the broken ones. When he sees people who are in the pit that cannot be climbed out of, that's where God goes. Because that's where God, and only God, can save. So I just invite you to a time of reflection, if you'd like. If you're thinking about a situation that you're powerless over, or that you need the care of God,